As you know, this week Gaza has been rocked by air raids from the Israeli military. Yesterday we covered this historic struggle for self-determination. But what many people may not realize is how brutal Israel's blockade really is, and what it means for 1.5 million Gazans who live there. It's one of the densest areas in the world, and 80% of the population has to depend on outside goods to survive. As of 2010, there were only 81 items allowed into Gaza. Everything else has been prohibited from entering. Why? Well, the Israeli government claims that most items could be made into weapons. Interesting claim, considering it's a list that's riddled with contradictions. Let's see here. Chocolate, medical supplies, children's books, toys. These are apparently the kinds of things that undermine Israeli security. Well, as we know, that's ludicrous. Clearly, there's more to the story, like this. According to recently released Israeli government documents, Israel's authorities were using food as a method of collective punishment. Officials intended to, quote, put Palestinians on a diet, even going so far as calculating how many calories each Gazan would need per day to avoid a humanitarian disaster. To talk more about this disturbing reality as someone who's been to Gaza and has seen this crisis firsthand, I'm joined by Mike Preisner, co-founder of March Forward. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, Abby.
Hey, so you just heard us talking about this absurd list of goods that are prohibited from entering Gaza. You went there not too long ago. Why did you go, and what was your experience there?
Well, I actually went to Gaza in the wake of Operation Cast Lead in 2009. And the reason we went is because there had been so much death, so much destruction, so many casualties in that onslaught. Yet all of the basic things that people needed to both treat the wounded and rebuild the destruction were not allowed in. So, for example, massive numbers of homes and hospitals and schools were destroyed, but then the blockade wouldn't allow concrete into Gaza, so they couldn't rebuild anything. But when I went, our delegation primarily was bringing in, which was illegal according against the blockade that Israel had put on, hundreds and hundreds of wheelchairs. And the reason that we had to illegally bring in hundreds of wheelchairs is because the onslaught during Operation Cast Lead, which we are probably going to see repeated in a lot of ways with what's going on now, was using such high-tech and brutal weapons, but also attacking the civilian population, that there was such a high number of amputees from white phosphorus and other new experimental munitions. And there were so many amputees, and the Israeli blockade would not allow in wheelchairs for the people and the children and elderly who had had their legs blown off. So I think that speaks to kind of the cruelty and the brutality of the blockade.
Yeah, we just had on Nora Barrows-Friedman recently, who was talking about the psychological warfare, the architecture of occupation, and really, the sewage runoff into these settlements. And as you just mentioned, I mean, wheelchairs prevented from helping amputees when they're using white phosphorus. It's just a war crime. Israel's no stranger to war crimes or kind of the impunity for international law. What do you think about the toys and chocolate thing? I mean, what is that about? Is that just another aspect of this psychology?
Yeah. I mean, you can't call it anything else other than psychological warfare when it comes to those things. I mean, we're talking about an entire generation of children who are living in Gaza City, the most densely populated city on the planet, who have all grown up being rained on by bombs and bullets, watching their family members killed, watching their homes destroyed. And the fact that the blockade does not allow in toys for these children, it can't be called anything else but psychological terrorism. And you imagine, I mean, I'm an Iraq war veteran, and a lot of the work we do in March Forward is dealing with the crisis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So we can see that among soldiers who have gone to Iraq and Afghanistan for one tour are then plagued for the rest of their lives with psychological trauma. Imagine what the entire population of Gaza City is feeling like. And this is a tactic. I mean, this is calculated by the Israeli government. I mean, one example of something we learned when I traveled to Gaza, which is documented now, is that white phosphorus was used on children's schools while schools were in session. And so children had their limbs melted off, their faces melted off. And Israel, of course, knew, because Israeli intelligence is very good, that there were students in session in those schools that were targeted. And so when you're directing a war against the children, not allowing them toys, not allowing them anesthetic while they have their limbs amputated, I mean, this is terrorism.
Yeah, it seems like they just want to accelerate the suffering as much as they can. As sad as that is to say, I don't see any other explanation for it. Mike, let's talk about the targets. As you just mentioned, they target children in schools. Israel's coming out now, the Israeli government saying that they're dropping leaflets over Palestine to pretty much warn people, hey, stay away from any Hamas infrastructure. But I mean, really, Hamas is the democratically elected leadership of Palestine, so how ridiculous is this to say, or what does this really mean?
Well, the Israeli propaganda machine is putting out that they're doing everything they can to avoid civilian casualties, and they advertise these leaflets that they dropped all over the city saying, do not be near anyone in Hamas, basically. Well, we can look and just see what historically has been done. I mean, you know that Hamas is the government there, and so civic society and the state society there is run by Hamas, the police, and many hospitals and schools and things like that. So you're always around them. But we saw that the #1 casualty in Operation Cast Lead and in all the wars that Israel launches against the Palestinian people, that civilians are the #1 casualty. They're thinking that they can just wipe their hands clean by saying they dropped these leaflets because they've learned the lessons of Cast Lead and the massacre on the Freedom Flotilla, which caused a huge shift in consciousness in the United States with the Palestinian people. So they're trying to say, we're doing what we can to avoid civilian casualties, while at the same time they're bombing and killing civilians. And there's already children, including an 11-month-old baby who's dead in this onslaught.
Right. Yeah, I mean, talk about what might be the response now. We just read reports today of, an onslaught of potential ground troops. Can you give us an update on that?
Well, there were about 70,000 reservists that were called up very recently. We know that soldiers are massed at the border, looking like what they're preparing to launch a ground invasion. But we don't really know. I mean, things are up in the air right now. I mean, what we do know is that the Israeli government, with the U.S. government, because this happened after there was a meeting in Washington, that they are embarking on a plan to wipe out all resistance to U.S. policy in the region.
And let's talk about why this is happening. I mean, we know that Palestine is bidding for statehood November 29th, I think it is. What does this have to do with the offensive that we're seeing, Mike?
Well, November 29th is Palestine Solidarity Day. And on that day, Palestine is going to be bringing to the UN General Assembly their bid for statehood. Which would really mean, I mean, that the big important thing about that is if they are granted statehood, then the International Criminal Court has to see in this international court the allegations of war crimes and illegal settlements by the state of Israel. So Israeli and U.S. officials tried very, very hard to pressure the Palestinian Authority into not introducing this statehood bid, and actually said, if you do this, we're going to punish you for it. And so we're just weeks away from that statehood bid, and so it's very likely that this is that punishment that they are talking about, trying to prevent that from happening. But overall, this strategy is because Israel wants all of the land of Palestine. They are not really trying for a two-state solution or any type of peaceful solution. They have made clear that they want all the land. That was revealed in the Palestine Papers, where it showed that the PA put everything on the table, every possible concession to the Israeli government, and they wanted nothing to do with it because they want all the land. And that coincides with the U.S. policy of making the new Middle East that George W. Bush talked about, where every organization in every country that's a barrier to complete U.S. domination in the region is to be completely wiped out. We saw with Iraq, we see it happening in Afghanistan, targeting Iran and Syria, and of course Lebanon and the resistance movements in Palestine are on that list as well.
Indeed. Let's talk about what you're here to do. You're here helping organize nationwide movements, protests against the offensive. Talk about those and how people can get involved, Mike.
Yes. Well, people all over the country are taking action against the horrific things they're seeing on TV, and no doubt know is happening in Gaza City right now. So there's actually been many dozens of protests in dozens of states and cities across the United States over the past couple of days, really the day that the bombing started, and they're continuing today. In fact, right after I leave this interview, I'm headed down to the White House for a protest there. There's protests taking place in cities all over the country tonight and throughout the weekend and even into next week. And as things escalate, if they escalate, no doubt we will be there demonstrating as well, just like we'll be demonstrating on November 29th at the White House. So if people want a complete list of actions, go to answercoalition.org and you can find an updated list of wherever protest actions are happening all over the country. Because it's really going to be, I mean, the U.S. government is determined to carry this out. The Israeli government is determined to carry this out with our tax dollars, quite a bit of our tax dollars. The only thing that's going to change this equation is massive repudiation from the people and people raising their voices and taking action.
Absolutely. I mean, over $4 billion a year to sponsor these acts of, couldn't call it anything else but terrorism, Mike, so it's up to us to stand up for the human dignity of the Palestinians. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
If you like what you see so far, go to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/breakingtheset and subscribe. Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/breakingtheset. I know haters gonna hate and trolls gonna troll, but if you're actually intelligent, you can write me and let me know what you think. And if you're wondering about what I'm doing when I'm not on air, follow me on Twitter at Abby Martin. I'm gonna take a break from my preaching for now, but stay tuned to hear my hero and villain of the day next.